Here is a brief update to the Battle of Talavera, La Bataille de Español Talavera. It's I think 1979 edition map and counters, and I'm using the current Marshall Enterprises rules. Now, I started originally, the game starts out with a French setup. We have the first corps here, you have the second corps around in this area. You might just be able to make out some indications. So there's various units within 2 hexes of these points, and the cavalry down here as well. The Spanish setup kind of more or less around these points here and some back here, and this is the British Army here. Now I started what they call the 5th scenario, which basically runs the first scenario, which is Ruffin's night attack to try and capture a hex here, which failed miserably. Then there's a morning attack, which tries to capture a hex here and then here, which also was not going to work, and so I withdrew them, and then we moved straight on to the 11 AM turn, or 11:40, and it's the afternoon attack, the main attack of the battle. So historically there was a long artillery bombardment from the French here onto the British positions here, and these white counters indicate units that are lying down to hide, obviously, from that artillery bombardment. But I had started the game a bit differently, because the victory conditions for the French, who are starting here and here, are to take a corps off the road running off the map there. Now there's more to the map. We got the actual town of Talavera here. We got, I think it's the Tagus River here. So these player aids are actually covering part of the map, but you can just make out the road here runs out of Talavera. That's on the British and Spanish, I guess, army's line of communications. So if the French exit a corps there, they achieve a great victory. Now the British the Spanish can't do much. They're quite fragile. You can see there's a lot of French troops here now. I'm now on the just about to start the 1 AM turn. So we've had 5 turns of play. The French have sort of surged forwards and knocked many of the Spanish back. We've got units in plus grand disorder making their way back down the highway, such as it is called here in the Spanish terrain. So these Spanish units are holding. Some have entered Talavera and are going to put up a show of defending that. But then most of the rest of the units here are French. These are some Spanish cavalry which have actually done remarkably well in routing some French cavalry units. And in fact, the French do have one total loss. This was a cavalry unit that charged one of these fellows here, and then was charged in melee attacked in their turn, succeeded in routing it off the board. And there's another. Yes, there's an infantry unit who had an aborted attack over here. So the French attacked the Spanish, not without some loss and some disorder, but they're still making their way through quite clearly. So the Spanish are just kind of like a delaying force for the British army, and sort of creating some attrition on the French. The British army can win by putting they gain I think a complete victory by putting the French corps on level 2 morale. So that's disorganised and or eliminated units. So 2 French corps on level 2, or both on level 1 is kind of like a semi-victory. Now the rules do state that if both sides can claim a victory, then neither side has won. So I don't think the British are going to be able to stop the French exiting a corps there if they wish. So the only chance the British have now is removing themselves from the heights and somehow creating enough damage to the French as not to make it worth, to make their army not a very strong proposition. So these have not moved at all and since the beginning of the 1140 turn. The last part of this scenario, it's been all the Second Corps and the cavalry, and in fact some French units have moved up here, and we've got a leader, a strong division here and some cavalry aiming to come around the flank. So the British have sent some cavalry here, and they sent the rest of their cavalry here because they didn't want French cavalry, which is this tired bunch around here, breaking through, coming around and sort of coming in the rear. These are Spanish cavalry trying to hold these cavalry off. With the French infantry coming in, they won't last long there. They'll have to retreat over the river. Now, the British have sent attention their reserves, infantry reserves essentially, which were here this way, to try and protect this flank. And they've got interesting proposition now. You can see the slope hexes. There's some around here, so essentially what they're going to have to do is, I think, is withdraw these men here, and so refuse this flank. These men may come into the slope here, or you may even need some up there. The French might just march off there, in which case the British have lost. Perhaps as they do so, then the British can launch an attack, but you see they can't do so immediately with these French on their other flank. So maybe if one corps of the French moves off there, then the British will be free to attack this corps at leisure. But you can see it's a difficult proposition now for the British, and apparently it's a bit of a flaw in the game and the victory conditions as written, because historically the Spaniards were more or less left alone, just kind of frightened off a bit, and this was where the battle occurred. But for me it looked quite obvious that, knowing the Spanish army to be relatively flimsy, and having a whole corps of French down here, just to punch through there, to come around here on the British flank, or take their intended route off the board there. So apparently that's a bit of a flaw in the victory conditions. I don't know if they've changed with the Clash of Arms edition. This is the old Marshall Enterprises edition. But it has led me to have some interesting thoughts that if the French do move off here, then essentially what they're doing is they're moving down the line of communications of the British Army, and so forcing them to withdraw and obviating the British defensive line, because essentially what happened was the French army has been moving up, many sort of days hence. The Spaniards were over here, the British were further back, took up a defensive position, and the Spanish eventually joined the British to form this defensive line. So the advancing French are faced with a defensive line, what to do. Now if they do burst through, okay, they've sort of gained the initiative that the British don't have their comfortable terrain to defend, but they haven't done anything against the British army, and essentially, nor they've put the Spanish in disarray, but they keep doing that, and the Spanish keep coming back. But the British army is the main threat in this theatre at the moment. So really the French want to create enough damage as to make that not of a threat anymore, whilst retaining their army in being. So I think even though that is a victory condition in the scenario, the ultimate victory for these two forces is to severely damage each other. So if I do move the French off there and claim a victory here, what I'm going to do is say, okay, so that means then that now the British have to fall back. The French are on their supply line, so the British are forced to attack the French. The French will presumably take ground of their choosing, and then the battle will switch. So the British will have to attack the French in defensive positions. So what I'm thinking again to do is I'm just going to take the map, turn it on its side. I'm sorry about the lighting. And so we can forget that this is Talavera. I'll take, say, that much of the map and say, right, the British are marching down this road trying to get back to, I don't know, Portugal or Porto or wherever, and the French are in their way. So now the tables have been turned, and so this will just be considered generic Spanish countryside. I think it's going to work really well, because if we got two roads coming, this is just the map seam, we've got two roads coming off the map here, so then the British objective will be to move their army and being past here and or destroy the French army. And the French then, if we see, they've got all these heights, slopes, including a nice height there, and these ones to defend themselves on. Now it's very far back, so it's a shame there's not more room for them to rout and recover from, but I don't know, I suppose I could do it a bit differently and have the British starting here and the French here, but that seems like a natural defensible position. I think that could make an interesting follow-up game using the same map and the same counters. All I have to decide is what to do with the losses from this battle, how many to recover in between. So this is where I am with Talavera, and just about to start the 1 o'clock on the hour turn, which means we might get one of these Spanish brigades released. They'll soon be released anyway as the French are coming all the way up. The Spanish have unlimbered some artillery here and here. It's a shame that they might have time to get some more around here, so we might see a bit of a stand from the Spanish here. Some units have fought very bravely. I've been actually surprised because the Spanish are greatly hampered. They have cavalry, for example, have to make a morale check just to charge. The infantry all have morale of sort of 40, 41, maybe 35 at best. So they dissipate quite easily. But I was surprised at what the reverses they have managed to cause to the French. And like I say, this period has been quite, this portion has been quiet so far. But you can see that there's going to be a cavalry battle any minute now. And then we will see what the British have to do, if they're going to try and remain where they are, or if they can dislodge themselves, revert back to cover and go back to cover their line of communications. I don't know. It's they're not much closer than the French to it at the moment, and with this whole corps bearing down on them from that side, it's going to be tricky to extricate themselves. I don't really fancy the chance of the British with sort of, let's move this out of the way just to see. So the Tagus River runs off down there. We could get like a motley mass of Spanish here and British trying to defend through these vineyards here, but you know, I wouldn't fancy that being caught between two French corps. So it does look like it's going to be a loss for the Brits, but I think the question is how soon the game will end. So the 8:40 turn will be the last turn. It'll end at 9, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 24 turns left. There's plenty of time for the French to get all the way up there. Before I go this time around, I'd just like to say something about the rules I'm using. I'm using La Bataille Première Martial Enterprises rules, and this is the 2011 rule set. I also have the 2000. So this is the same rule set. It's just the 2000 and hang on. Yes, it's just the 2015 edition, and these are essentially the same rules as the rules that originally came with the game, which are the 1979 rules, but with sort of some refinements and some changes. I wanted to use the updated versions because I've used them for some of the print and play games on the Marshall Enterprises website, and I'm intending to play Quatre Bras sooner or later too. And maybe another game of this. I want to play with the same rule set, but I found that there's holes in these rules. I think what they've done is they've been very careless in their updating and cutting and pasting. So there's deletions of sentences from the rules, and there's it looks like the rules have been sort of written in a rather haphazard manner. Then someone went through and edited them really badly, so there's lots of duplications, omissions and contradictions. So in the end I had to ditch, after a lot of effort, I had to ditch these ones. I've gone back to these, which don't have quite so many problems, but I don't know what's has changed apart from for the worse from these to those ones. But anyway, I've gone back to these, but even so I've had to completely rewrite the cavalry rules, and this is just the rules for cavalry charge and movement. I've got another side here, and I've obviously done it in abbreviated form because as they stand they're unplayable in this because, like I say, they contradict. For instance, 1 point says cavalry cannot move through, 2 points says cavalry cannot move through certain units, and another point it says they can with a morale check. And then, for instance, in the charge procedures, it's just basically makes nonsense on units can form carré or check to stand, and then the processes they just have are sort of incomplete, but in some form repetitive in some other forms, and so do not tie together at all. I've had to completely rewrite them and explicate what is not done in the rules. And I got it to my satisfaction now that I've got a working system. Obviously I'm play testing with this game, but and I think it is the intent of the rules, but it is not the rules as written, which are just full of ambiguities and holes and even contradictions, like I said. So that's just something to note, which is a real shame because I had high hopes for these rules, because I have the Marie-Louise and the regulations of the year 30 or whatever, which are quite complicated, and I fancied playing using a simpler rules set for these games, and I noticed that these are an updated version of the sort of 1970s rules, and I thought, great, they've just sort of gone back to basics, or kept the basics, just refined it and made it a bit better. No, they haven't, they've made it worse. But the problem is I don't want to use the old rules because there are some differences, some sort of subtle but significant differences. The basics is all the same, and I don't want to play each game with a different set of rules, and I don't want to use the oldest rule set because I do consider that they've had some, they've had years and years of playing, and so that the refinements which they intended to put in these rules must make for a better game. Well, that's not necessarily true, is it? But I want to give them the benefit of the doubt that there's been a lot of effort and thought, time gone into the changes in here. For example, in the old rules there was a completely separate charge phase. In these rules the charge happens at the beginning of each player turn, but it's not the actual melee at the end of it. It's not resolved until the end of the turn with all the other melees. In the old rules, this is just an example of their difference. The cavalry charge melees are resolved at the top of the turn, as soon as the cavalry have done their charge movements, and that's before any infantry movement, which could create very interesting situations, like cavalry opening up huge holes in the enemy line through which infantry could move. That's changed now. So they obviously felt that was creating unrealistic situations. So I don't want to continue under those old premises, but the old rules I think are actually better written with less ambiguities than these. I think they've tried to tighten things up, but they haven't, and I guess they've done it in their minds, but they haven't managed to put it down in print.